Hi everyone, I'm Airier, and today we're looking at Overly Sarcastic Productions, Miscellaneous Myths. This is Atlantis. Now, I know a bit about Atlantis myths because Homer wrote about it, and then everyone else stole it as their own brainchild for everything. A DreamWorks movie named Atlantis. There was the Stargate spin-off Atlantis, which admittedly was really awesome and had Aquaman in it when he was at Aquaman or Khal Drogo, and frankly, it was freaking amazing, and I need to finish that someday. My geekery aside, that's more or less the extent of what I know about it. And that it was an FGO, but I don't actually know what happened in that segment, so I can't say anything about it. That's it. I got nothing else, and I'm pretty sure most of my knowledge is completely pop culture based and has nothing to do with the original myths. Which is why I'm actually really excited, because that link below to the video that Red did, hit it up. It's going to have all the information I'm about to geek out over, because I know myself. I'm going to geek out over old shit that I really find cool. That's why I do this. So we're going to do it. Again, link below, hit it up. Let's get started.
Man, I think everyone loves Atlantis. Just
It is
the
pretty awesome as a
concept
myth.
is so compelling and fun.
Sunken
An
city
ancient
hidden under the
magical
waves.
civilization lost at the bottom of the ocean?
Oh, this is
Ready to
probably
sign up.
that one I know.
The premise
I
is
don't know the other
inherently
one.
fun because it taps into our primal, deep-rooted desire to explore and discover new incredible
Yeah.
things. We want ancient trap-filled
Indiana
temples
Jones.
and hidden stockpiles of pirate treasure and maybe a couple bizarrely intricate puzzles.
I don't think I recognize this one. The previous one, of course, was, Uncharted. I don't
Thrown in for
recognize
flavor.
that.
We love the sci-fi vision of outer space because we imagine it full of incredible new worlds and new civilizations just waiting to be sought out through convenience.
I know it's not a reference to Starfield because this came out 4 years ago and Starfield just came out, but everything you said, we love sci-fi because stuff. Starfield. No stuff. Sorry, I'm a bit salty right now. It still hurts.
Convenient lightspeed drives or stargates or other means of
Oh,
bypassing
dude,
that
Stargate,
frustrating speed of
yeah.
light limitation. And I think we love Atlantis for the same reason. A fantasy land so close to home, but so alien. Something we could go out
Oh,
and
this is
find.
probably
As
the
a bonus,
Marvel,
it's also a
DC version.
fantastic hubris story. Atlantis
Hubris?
is the go-to example these
Yep.
days for a great civilization brought to ruin by
Ooh,
its
don't
own
know that
hubristic
one.
decadence. I mean, if you're not into Rome. Most commonly,
Multiple
it's assigned
times
some
it's
sort
Rome.
of great power or technological supremacy
Yeah.
that rarely screws
Dude,
up
this
and
is still one of
sinks
the
into the
coolest
ocean as
movies.
a result. Doesn't really get more brought to ruin than that. But narrative appeal aside, the greatest charm of the story of Atlantis is that it's so
What?
close to home. It's not an alien civilization or
this one.
another dimension. It's here in our ocean. And, it's not the least plausible thing in the world. I mean, it took us till 2005 to finally snap a photo of a real live giant squid. There's
Really?
all kinds of horrifying
Wait. Oh, live giant squid, because we had found the previous dead ones washed up, so we know they existed, but living ones we had a hard time finding. That's what threw me off there. Okay.
crap down there, and that's just the stuff we've been able to find.
And my suffering. Oh, yeah, I've heard of this. This is the blobfish. I thought this was a joke the first time I saw it, but no. This is a real fish. It does exist. It's not photoshopped. I really wish it was photoshopped instead.
As of 2019, over 80% of the oceans remain unexplored. Is it so hard to
80%?
believe that there could be a lost
Honestly, I'm surprised we had it
civilization
that much so
slumbering
far.
below the waves? All right, calm down there, Lovecraft, because unfortunately, yeah, it is that hard to believe. So let's talk about
Well, technically, and just throw it a little out there is an example right now of a very famous sunken city that we know about that has been rediscovered in recently modern times in the 50-ish years. That would actually be a good bit of Alexandria on the coast of Egypt, which is actually known to be sunk under the waves of a city that I'm actually just... I'm actually forgetting which city it's connected to. It was basically the port town where the Alexandria essentially was. And it is currently sunken below the waves because of subsidence. But so much of the architecture is there and just somewhat buried under silt. It's actually fascinating to show that this is a thing that happened. Now, of course, it's not Atlantis. Alexandria is way more recent than any of these stories. But this is an example of that exact thing happening in places that we forgot about. So, out in the ocean, kind of crazy. Closer to shore, there's actually historic precedence for this being a thing that we are exploring right now. So, your mileage may vary.
Plato. The very first reference to the lost city of Atlantis comes to us courtesy of Plato around
really? That was
360
Homer.
BC. In
Oh.
his philosophical dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, Plato claims to be recounting the events of the Athenian lawgiver and part-time poet Solon's visit to Egypt sometime in the 580s BC. According
To Egypt, really? And that would be from 9,500 BC. So he's talking about a story he heard from someone else who's telling a story he heard from someone else. Which is a great way to say, well, this is what I heard, and I don't need to worry about my credibility. It's the other person's credibility from the credibility of the person they heard. There's a reason fifth-hand information should be treated with a lot of skepticism until verified.
According to Plato, according to Solon, he translated ancient Egyptian records recounting events that happened 9,000 years earlier, and that's where he found all this stuff about Atlantis. First problem, there's no evidence these records ever existed, so
Solon's visit to Egypt really happened. Oh, so that was a real person. He didn't just make it up. Oh. But there's no sign of any records of Atlantis and no prior reference to either Greek or Egyptian writing stories. Also, this is the Stone Age. Yeah. Although I wonder if it would be a case of an inflated idea over time. And there was an idea that, hey, the Nile floods frequently, and there are multiple histories where the various kingdoms were destroyed because of flooding from it. It's part of a cycle that was very well known for a long time because it just kept happening. I wonder if the idea between that and then Atlantis being the city lost beneath the waves was literally just a giant Nile flood, but conflated over time over so much history. I don't know. That should be fascinating to find out if there's roots to that.
So
probably
Plato
too old at
seems
this
to have
point.
pulled all his evidence for these dialogues straight out his own ass. But don't worry,
Yeah.
there's way bigger problems to
It's a
come.
peach,
So
of
the
course.
purpose of these dialogues is to explain
No. Yeah. Timaeus and Critias agree? I feel like I'm missing... Oh, it's whatever she's about to say.
why Athens is really cool and decadence is bad. And the evidence provided is that this one
Athens is cool. Decadence. Oh, that's a picture of Athens, and that's decadence. Okay. Sorry, I was just thinking generic Rome or Grecian area. I mean, not wrong.
dialogues is to explain why
Also,
Athens is
isn't
really
exactly
cool
a
and
steer.
decadence is bad. And the evidence provided is that this one time, 9,000 years ago, Athens repelled an invasion from a huge island nation out in the Atlantic. Second problem, Athens had
what?
only existed for a few centuries at this point.
Athens has people, but is Neolithic in time. Wait, Athens actually existed, even in some category at all, 3,000 years BC? I'm actually more surprised about that. Them not existing as the city-state in ancient history, not surprising. Them existing 3,000 BC, even in some capacity as a Neolithic, I'm guessing, farming hut, I was actually not even aware of that being a thing. Has human inhabitants? Probably. Athens is a center to Mycenaean Greece, which is still mostly unknown, but we're learning more about it slowly. Post-Bronze Age collapse, that's a P, and decline 2000 or 1200 BC. 900 BC begins absorbing other towns, becoming a vast city-state. Solomon begins reform. Solon becomes a democracy within the century. Plato. Wow. Honestly, just between Athens existing in ancient Greece, it's thousands of years just until Plato. It really does give you an example of just the scope of time when the stuff that you consider to be ancient and admittedly thousands of years ago is still thousands of years prior. And then 3,000 years before that, it existed, even if probably not called Athens and more just people happen to be in the same area. But the fact that people were in the area at all, it's just, sorry, this is fascinating to me in every single way possible.
In 9,000 years
This is why I
prior,
do
people
this
were
shit.
still banging rocks together and trying to
Ooh.
domesticate goats. Not exactly a good millennium for a golden age
does
of
anyone actually
civilization.
domesticate
The
goats?
dialogue lays out that the ancient Athenians were pure and virtuous and eschewed luxury in favor of a literally Spartan lifestyle.
Yeah, I see what Red meant by pulling things out of his ass.
Of militant training and no personal belongings, because Plato
Yeah.
thought Sparta's political structure was really cool, so he decided
I mean,
his
they
fanfic
did
version
do a lot of
ancient
things
Athens
right.
would be an
Some
idealized
things
version
not.
of modern Athens with the rad military class of Sparta thrown in for dopeness. Also, fun fact, none of Athens' weird attitudes towards women. Plato's legendary ancient
Wait, really? Moreover, since military pursuits when the common men and women, the men of those days in accordance with the custom set up a figure, image of the goddess in full armor, to be a testimony that all animals which associate together, male as well as female, may, if they please, practice in common the virtue which belongs to them without distinction of sex. Oh! See, the one thing I've been getting a lot from Red's contact and often condemnation of Greece is that a lot of the ancient people were like, hey, women are bad because they smell. And for reasons that are even dumber than the one I just pulled out of my own ass. Kind of like Plato did for some other thing. So the fact that Plato dropped that is surprising. I really hope she goes more into that rather than just mentioning it as like, hey, here's a weird thing. Because this is very different and I kind of want to know more about it. Also, I just realized they're bro-fisting down there.
Athens was completely egalitarian, even the military.
I mean,
though
I
he
doubt
did
it.
believe that while ancient women were equal to men, modern women were inherently less virtuous. Thanks, Plato. Your wokeness is appreciated. Anyway, Plato's main
Wait, what did that say? So ancient women were better, and now we have the less good ones. God, that's still a jerk move. Not as big of a jerk as you could have been, as opposed to the original writers of the mythology around Pandora, who explicitly were jerks. Just dear God, man. Also, my nose is killing me right now. It's like I'm allergic to cats. I live with 2 of them. They like to sleep on my pillow. Nah, that couldn't be the case.
appreciated. Anyway, Plato's main philosophy in the dialogues is that luxury bad, no luxury good. Plato believed that luxury was an
Luxury and wealth. Fundamental human nature. Virtue and goodness. I mean, this is still an argument you see today, and you see it played out in the reason people came to this conclusion often. While you don't have to be virtuous and good and ignore this, a lot of times if you go for this, you don't have this.
inherently corruptive influence that drove people
think
to
of
become
any
less
corrupt
virtuous, and he
asshole.
decided to illustrate
Think of
this
any of them.
really directly with his Athens versus Atlantis conflict. See, while Athens was off being all rad and Spartan, Atlantis had a very different
I wonder if he did
experience.
send
The
this in
root premise
Sparta.
of this narrative is that back in the old days,
I
the
want
gods
this bit.
divvied up the world, and while Athena got the region of Athens, Poseidon got the island of Atlantis, a
Oh.
huge, beautiful, resource-rich island nation
The Cletus Cletos Mountain. Oh, there's even a little mountain design down there.
with everything a budding civilization could ask for. The island is described as being bigger than Libya and Anatolia combined, which,
How big is
judging by
that?
the size of modern-day Anatolia, makes it bigger
Here's the thing. I have bigger than Texas. Damn. Also, I have no idea what Anatolia is. Or now that I think about how big Libya. Wow. Libya is. Apparently, I can't say words either. So,
bigger than
That's
Texas,
big.
but not by much. There,
wait, what did that say? Plato gives a number of very precise measurements for the size of the island and that manage to make exactly 0 sense when you put them all together. So let's go with the metric, with this metric for now. I could be somewhat smaller, but the point is that it's a giant island roughly 2/3 of the size of the entire known world at this point in history and was incredibly rich in resources.
There, Poseidon fell in love with a mortal woman, Cleito, and they had a whole bunch of kids, 5 sets of twin boys, with the eldest named Atlas. And by the way, Plato takes a
Atlas? I mean, Atlas, Atlantis. But also, wasn't Atlas specifically the name of a Titan in Greek mythology? Or is this more of a Mycenaean thing? No, that was well before that as well. Why do the Atlanteans all sound so Greek? Critias said Solon translate the names out.
hot minute to assure us that while all the names he provides are distinctively Greek, these names are translations Solon provided based on the original meaning of the non-Greek
I'm actually surprised that apparently Plato decided to cover himself by saying, well, these are the names we use for them. Which, admittedly, localization is a thing, so it's not actually that crazy to believe that someone would localize it. But they had enough contact with ancient Egypt between ancient Greece and honestly ancient China as well, and I think about it, that it's kind of surprising that they felt the need to do that, because it's not like that was a new thing at any time period. Trade was well and booming. Those weren't hidden places. I can't use Egyptian names in this poetry. I won't ever actually write. Better localize it. Oh, because a lot of the dialogues were written as poetry at the time, because you didn't actually write prose. Yeah.
Greek names that he derived from the original Egyptian records, which again don't exist. That's why this very much not Greek invading empire sounds so Greek, and also implies that fictional versions of Atlantis shouldn't look nearly as Greco-Roman as they frequently do. Anyway, while Poseidon made a walled-off temple paradise
In that case, would it be easier just to depict them as Egyptian because that's where the records were? Or can you just go full on whatever the hell we want? Probably full on whatever the hell we want. I like that. More for autonomy.
for Cleito, he also started divvying up the island among his demigod children. Atlantis got divided into 10 parts, with the central region ruled by Atlas, king of Atlantis, and the other 9 regions ruled separately by his brothers. They put down some rules for each other,
So if anyone starts anything, we all side with the one who didn't start it. Does that include fridge disputes? I said sorry. Also, I like how all of them have slightly pointed ears because of the Poseidon factor. Yeah, that's just a nice little detail she's kept going throughout them. And the eyes.
Importantly, that if any one of them attacked another, all the other kings and princes had to come defend the injured party. This was supposed to keep things in line and prevent Atlantis from tearing itself apart.
I mean, I know she's going to reference Troy, but I was going immediately to something more recent in World War I, because a series of alliances that you have to strike back on was literally how that war started. And then grew so much.
Because it worked so well when they tried it with Helen of Troy. Now,
I mean, give them a little credit. We fucked that up just as much as everyone else did. Constantly. The island of Atlantis and then the city of Atlantis. Dude. I know it's stupid, but it looks cool. There's a trench, the place, the canal grid. Oh, they had a grid of canals and then towers among rings. It's literally Atlantis. Sorry, not this. It's literally Atlantis here because it's the story of Atlantis. I just realized in Jobless Reincarnation, they have a city with rings of land and water, and they literally just took Atlantis. Just realizing that now, and I probably should have because I think someone told me already, but I didn't realize why they said that.
There's a pretty nifty description of the physical layout and appearance of Atlantis, but what Plato wants us to focus on is not any of his rad world building, it's the fact that these 10 divine kings produce 10 lineages of kings, but the farther we go down the generations, the less divine these kings become. The first generation is half-god, the second is one-quarter, etc. And once the divinity...
How long have we been crazy rich? The divinity thing, and the ears are rounded now is the way to show that. Yeah. Further from the gods. Granted, you can solve that with inbreeding, which is exactly why most royals were incredibly inbred. Habsburgs. If I need to explain that, I don't want to. And if you know what it is, I am sorry for bringing up the mental image you just had. It is disturbing. I can't stop thinking about it. It haunts my nightmares. Just there.
thins out and the bloodline gets human enough, their growing human nature makes them vulnerable to the, according to Plato, inherently corruptive nature of their incredibly luxurious lifestyle. So their
because
very
they were rich,
lifestyle
but less
gradually
godly.
transitions into a colonial...
Mine, boy, mine. Oh, those are music notes. I thought it was PP for a second. Every mountain and ding, boys, I dig till you drop. Oh, it's the song from Pocahontas. Yeah, I'm embarrassing myself for not getting that right away. So they were basically telling the story of how they repelled a great fleet from an island nation as big as everything they knew, or near as big as everything they knew.
Exploitative lifestyle, and they start trying to invade the Mediterranean, where they conquer their way through almost everything, but find themselves stymied by Athens and their sweet, badass, totally...
Halt, villains, egads, such virtue, and those abs. Yes, Athens. Considering how much he seems to be, or specifically Plato is, I think the term is, and correct me if I'm wrong, wanking about the Spartan lifestyle. I'm surprised he didn't say Sparta was the one to do this, because it very much seems like the thing he would do. Also, considering some of the ways that Sparta had Aphrodite as a war goddess, kind of fits how he portrayed women in this prehistoric period of being fighters as well.
The original Do Not Steal military society. Unfortunately, we're missing the end of the second dialogue, but while we don't know exactly what happens, if we read between the lines and...
I'm going to assume they won. They went full endgame on it, most likely. This is actually one of those things that... This part right here, talking about missing dialogues that we know exist, and we can take extrapolate ideas of how it ended because it continued and Athens is still around and Atlantis is not. That's cool because there's that little bit of history that we could find, but we don't know where it's at. So it's hidden lore that we know exists somewhere or existed. Maybe it can be patched together from what we have already. And honestly, that's probably completely doable at this point because of what we have to cover it at the ending period compared to where it started in this dialogue. I would still love if someone made a discovery where it just happened to be an old translation or an oral style that was just kept, maybe moved around to different areas, translated because people moved around through trade routes. That is the kind of stuff I would absolutely find fascinating. If maybe there is an old copy written down on a sheet somewhere, stone, maybe a Rosetta version, that was just transferred over to Egypt or somewhere in Asia during the trade routes as a gift, and it just happens to be discovered later on and maybe some tomb because, sure, cool gift. This is the kind of stuff that makes it absolutely fascinating because that could happen. And there's a better chance of that than not, just because we have so many records that survived in that time period, including what happened before and after it. Just if anyone knows more about the archaeological side about this, let me know. Or if Blue specifically covered this, I will just do that immediately.
refer back to the first dialogue summary of the events, we infer that Zeus notices the evil corruption of the kings of Atlantis, calls a meeting of the Olympians, and tells Poseidon to do something about it. So Poseidon responds by striking Atlantis with a devastating earthquake, sinking the entire island in a single night. Now, the overt message of this dialogue was an attempt by Plato to demonstrate that...
So the entire thing... So the part that was covered and that they're assuming on is literally destruction. So how it came up, and considering the Greek myths, it was probably multiple rounds of bullshittery. But we know how it ultimately went. It was destroyed by its creator, or, well, not creator, by its initial god, Poseidon. But how it led up to that is just never covered, or the fight itself. Oh, damn, that's the good part, and that's what we don't have.
That wealth, luxury, and all the resources in the world, the kind of things empires typically seek out, will just make a people decadent and violent, and the real way to handle that kind of thing is to be more like Athens, specifically the Sparta part of Athens, not the imperialist part of Athens. The point of the story was that Atlantis had everything they'd ever need, but because they were human, and therefore flawed, they were consumed by vice and hubris and lost everything. It's pretty obviously an allegory meant...
Atlantis was lost to the waves for succumbing to decadence and luxury. Don't be like Atlantis. Be like Athens, which is definitely not decadent and succumbing to luxury, because that is not how they're remembered. Be like us, who is definitely not Sparta, who I'm definitely not talking about instead. I wonder if it was like an open secret that he was actually just talking about Sparta the entire time, and that was just a running joke. I have no idea, but I really hope it is.
Meant to illustrate the inherent flaws of humanity, with an overt good example, ancient Athens with their simple lifestyle, and a bad example, Atlantis with their overwhelming power and luxury driving them to spiral into greed. Also, there's this little weird bit where Plato says that the sunken Atlantis formed a mud shoal west of the Strait of Gibraltar, and that's why it's impossible to sail out in...
But afterward there occurred violent earthquakes and floods, and in a single day and night misfortune and all warlike men in a body sank to the earth. And the island of Atlantis in the manner disappeared in the depths of the sea, for which reason the sea in those parts is impassable and impenetrable, because there is a shoal of mud in the way, and this was caused by the subsidence of the island. Gibraltar? Really? I mean, I know it's actually incredibly rough because it's literally two different bodies of water that are mixing at that point, and it causes incredibly disturbed currents. Honestly, the same thing happens when you have canals connecting two bodies of water. That shit gets nasty because water moves a lot, and a lot of moving water cuts shit like rock, stone, people. Like, not actually cut, well, sometimes a stone, but really, that's where they said it was. At this point, I'm almost wondering if he found out there was an old city there that just happened to subside due to storms, and he just said, that's Atlantis, and ignored the rest. Or he was talking about ancient France. It would be really weird if Atlantis was France this entire time, and rumors of the demise were heavily exaggerated. I don't think that's where they're going, but it amuses me enough I'm going to pretend I believe it.
Into the Atlantic? I did a bunch of Googling and asked Blue what the heck he was talking about, and basically Plato is totally making this up. There was never any mud shoal, and the Atlantic was always accessible from the Mediterranean. I don't know why he said that.
Honestly, sometimes Plato just...
Oh, he just made it up? Huh. Honestly, I thought he was referring less to a mud shoal, more just the impassibility he made. The mud shoal, it might be his belief without any actual evidence. Huh.
Like to troll his readers. Keeps them on their toes, make sure they're paying attention. You get it.
Yeah, that checks out.
He's
now,
a
while
troll.
Plato seems to have made up Atlantis out of whole cloth, there was a very noteworthy event that may have influenced some of the details he included. Specifically, the Minoan eruption, a catastrophic volcanic eruption.
Footage from the Smithsonian secrets hunts for the Atlantis. Wait, this isn't I can't speak today. The Smithsonian. The series of museums that are open to the public and actually still free in Washington, D.C. that anyone can go to, and I haven't because I literally am too lazy to make the drive. I live about 5 hours away, but I live 5 hours away if you don't factor DC traffic. If you factor DC traffic, you can add another 5 hours to that. Okay, never mind. I just remember why I haven't done that.
that had occurred about 1,000 years prior on the island of Thera, modern-day Santorini. The Minoan eruption devastated the island, wiping out many settlements and dropping huge chunks of the island into the sea. This event was so cataclysmic, the consequences might have been felt as far as China, where some records from the 1600s BC describe a volcanic winter that caused crop failure and unseasonably cold weather in July. So when Plato describes an island nation devastated by a natural disaster so severe it collapses into the sea, the contemporary Greek listener would be like, oh damn, just like what happened to Santorini.
So it wasn't actually Santorini that is Atlantis. Santorini is what he's talking about, but he's not saying it because it's an easy touchstone in a cultural basis. Oh, okay, that's actually kind of fascinating.
It's like when modern-day disaster movies evoke Pompeii or the Titanic. So
because we know what those are as
the story was pretty clearly allegorical, and in fact, Plato had a well-documented habit of making up entire civilizations as thought experiments, which is very obvious.
This is literally the entire premise of Plato's Republic. An allegorical situation that he created that doesn't actually exist.
If you look at the rest of Plato's writing for context, a lot of contemporary writers thought he was being literal, and so was born...
Wait, where in the world is a whole continent? Oh my god. Wait, why does it have Japan and France up there? So what did that say down there?
Plato's writing for context, a lot of contemporary...
Cool, but like, where are you hiding, Atlantis? Did they pick the one image of Plato that makes him look absolutely concerned? They pick the one image of Plato that makes him look absolutely concerned about other people. It's like, oh, I told this allegory. Why do you all think it's literally real? Have you read any of my other stuff? Oh, you haven't. Oh, yeah, you're dumb. I'm going to walk away now. Yeah, actually, that makes a lot more sense in hindsight.
Contemporary writers thought he was being literal, and so was born the search for Atlantis. See, because Plato described everything about this island, including literally where it was located. Boom. But Atlantis isn't actually there. But everyone still really liked the idea of Atlantis, so they decided, hey, so Atlantis isn't where Plato said it was, but instead of assuming, like, maybe he just...
Is she playing Africa? Down, like, muted? Why? Oh, because there's the Atlantis of the sands and the desert, so they're going to talk about Africa because it's an excuse for her to use that song.
Just made it up as an allegory and it's supposed to be a big metaphor or something. What if we suppose everything he said about it was literally true, except where it's physically located? Yeah. Remember, this is an island bigger than Texas, roughly twice as big as Spain. Not many places for an island like that to hide, but still...
I mean, admittedly, there's, places that have sunk, but nothing continent-sized. Although, if Yellowstone ever went off, most of America would be completely atomized. No, I don't think I misspoke on that one. There's a good bit of it that might very well be atomized, considering the level of power talked about. More would just be blown to fuck, but, that's probably not entirely wrong.
Still, the base concept fascinated people, so all kinds of real-world locations have been proposed, including one that theorizes that Atlantis is Troy?
Why?
I mean, what?
That probably helped a lot more back when we thought Troy was also mythological. Because, Troy was a myth. It was like, here's an allegorical place that never happened. There was no Trojan War. Oh, we found it. That was a thing that did happen within the last 100 years. So, I mean, on the one hand, yeah. On the other hand, things do happen that are crazy up until we find them. So it's not entirely unheard of.
You guys know that's not underwater, right? Anyway, the search for Atlantis has been a popular subject since Plato first came up with it, with new theories and possible locations turning up every time we trip over some new and interesting geographical feature. So
okay, that actually is really cool. It's probably a crater. You can actually see the rings and the carbonization. I'm not entirely sure that's the word. I know sometimes when craters hit, it actually compounds things into magnetic rings, and the iron deposits are actually disturbed in such a way that it makes this impact. It looks like it's in a desert too. Oh God, craters are one of the things I really enjoy just going to look at because there's so much cool shit. Oh, but Atlantis because of the rings. I thought that might be the case, yeah.
So imagine how stoked everybody was when in the 1500s they sailed really far into the Atlantic and found an enormous brand new landmass. It was beautiful, rich in resources, and America. It was America.
But they probably didn't realize that at first.
So while some people are still trying to find the real Atlantis, and really, best of luck to you, send me pictures of...
Ironically, it's funny how she's saying, oh yeah, we found America. It's only a literal massive, technically 2 continents, 3 if you consider Central America separate, which technically we do, and they're on different geological plates, so that makes sense. But you think it's not Atlantis. It's technically bigger. And that's the downside. It is weird when you put it like that.
if you get them. The rest of us are mostly content to use it exclusively as a really fun fictional setting. And
Yeah.
while Atlantis' base story is good on its own, there are a few common changes people like to do when integrating it into a modern story or setting.
More
Change
high-tech?
number 1 usually removes the war.
Oh, yeah. Good God, y'all. Literally, the entire point of it was to show that they were decadent assholes who were destroyed by their own hubris and also lost a war against ancient Athens. War? Huh? What is it good for? Absolutely nothing. Say it again! And that pisses him off because the entire point of his metaphor was that the war showed that they were the bad guys.
And since that was kind of the whole point of the dialogue, I'm sure Plato's spinning in his grave about it, but since the war story binds Atlantis very strongly to this fictionalized version of super ancient Athens, usually writers will remove the Atlantis declares war on the rest of the world part and just focus on the Atlantis gets too decadent bit.
I mean, yeah, that's pretty good too, and it goes more into the mythological destruction. Until you realize it's the mythological destruction, the equivalent of wartime World War II Germany. Huh. Yeah.
This makes a more versatile setting without tying it too strongly to any specific place. Similarly, Atlantis is
Was that
frequently
Yu-Gi-Oh?
credited with having some kind of incredibly advanced technology or magic.
Magitech?
This is, bizarrely, because in the dialogues, Atlantis is described as having an excess of orichalcum, a mythical reddish metal that was described as being slightly less valuable than gold. Now, nobody
Wouldn't that be iron at the time? Or, no, brass. Probably just high-quality brass. A magical blue-green crystal that can do anything. Honestly, IRL is still pretty cool, too, especially how it flowing around. That looked really neat.
of orichalcum, a mythical reddish metal that was described as being slightly less valuable than gold.
like
Now,
iron,
nobody
though.
cares about the metal part, but orichalcum makes a very convenient name for any random magical element you want it to be. With this small
Yeah.
change, orichalcum becomes a do-anything MacGuffin, and Atlantis
That's
becomes
the
a
blue stuff
civilization
right there,
living
yeah.
large thanks to the properties of a magical material they have in excess. And that very easily segues into change number 3. Instead of being destroyed by the gods, Atlantis crumbles into the sea because of some direct fault of the Atlanteans. And frequently, this is
I mean, is it that really a change? It's not the direct fault of the Atlanteans, it's the direct fault of the gods, who did it as a direct fault of the Atlanteans being arrogant assholes. I mean, in Greek mythology, usually your direct fault for bad shit happening is the gods taking action. So, I'm going to give him a pass on this one.
portrayed as some kind of magical consequence of using too much MacGuffin metal. But sometimes
Oh,
it's
well, the
technological
MacGuffin metal.
failure, a natural disaster, or even a deliberate move on the part of the Atlanteans. Which brings me to change number 4,
Wait, was that last one? I know, that's probably
natural
DC.
disaster, or even a deliberate move on the part of the Atlanteans.
Was that Stargate Atlantis or something else? It's been so long, I don't actually remember.
Which brings me to change number
Under the sea. Oh, she literally just put the Little Mermaid in. Oh,
4, Atlantis
Yeah, it makes
surviving
sense.
under the sea, sometimes even rebuilding
Atlantis?
itself better than before. This one's really popular because it makes for a more interesting story. Sunken
It didn't
City,
die?
pretty
There's
rad.
more.
Sunken City full of magic fish people, super rad. Unless you're blue and you have thalassophobia and you can't watch Aquaman on a big screen because
I don't know what thalassophobia is, but I'm assuming it's a fear of water. Or deep water.
you'd literally rather die. Help me tell him it's good, guys. It has Julie Andrews as a kaiju.
The deeper
What?
you go, the more
No, go back! They got what?
Die. Help me tell him it's good, guys. It has Julie Andrews as a kaiju.
the
No, I heard that right. Julie Andrews as a kaiju. Okay, that is a thing I wasn't aware of. I haven't seen the movie. I might need to now. Huh.
deeper you go, the more nightmares there are. There's always a bigger fish.
He's not wrong. There's some crazy ass shit. Also, especially in the Gulf of Mexico, there's puddles, interior seas underneath the ocean itself that are made of hyper-dense and what might be heavily salinated water that don't actually mix with the rest because the compositions don't quite match. But they're way more of a stew of muds that have been stirred up. Sometimes I think they might be next to heat vents, but there's actually these interior levels that just have different compositions, visibly different. I mean, with heavy lighting and, sonar telling you it's different. So if you were there personally, you might not know, but also it's deep enough that if you were there personally, you'd probably die. There's a joke in there about a sub made of graphene, but I'm not going to make it because that's dark.
Now, all these changes are intended to make Atlantis a more interesting and compelling setting for use in
But it's
modern
also
stories. By
completely just
changing their
BS.
big destructive flaw from warmongering to decadence, it heightens the message that Atlantis crumbled under the weight of its own hubris rather
Although the warmongering part is what they were destroyed for, the decadence is also what he was going for as well, so they're ignoring only half of the allegory initially.
In Plato's message about the inherent corruptibility of humanity or whatever. Changing
DC
orichalcum from gold, but like red to magical
Red gold.
super element adds some fantastical elements to the narrative and gives us some wacky
I need to
magical
rewatch this
MacGuffins to
movie.
play
It's been
with.
too
And
long.
making Atlantis survive under the sea produces a really fun set piece, an underwater civilization. Hell, Atlantis has basically become the archetype for underwater civilization, even though Plato's story ends way before anything like that happens. Sinking underwater was supposed to destroy it, not make it cooler. Now, while all this is really cool, the one thing that confuses me is that everyone hell-bent on finding the real Atlantis seems to be ignoring the closest thing we have to a real Atlantis in terms of cool sunken civilization full of artifacts, and that is Doggerland. Now, Doggerland was an enormous landmass that connected modern-day Britain to the European mainland, all the way up to Denmark. It had huge forests, tons of wildlife, and a thriving Mesolithic hunter-gatherer society. But the
I have never heard about any of this. Granted, I don't usually look into this time period in 7,000 BC. Oh, because a lot of the water was contained in the ice. So it literally pulled it back from what is admittedly a very dry sea. You still have some, but land area today was the land masses we know. 7,000 BC, the Dogger Bank, which is what it is today. Most of the North Sea 16,000 years ago would have been just land. Holy. And these would have been the mountains up here, so Outer Cerro Pit Lake. Dude, talk about a difference. That is actually fascinating.
lower-lying areas
didn't know
were
anything about
gradually
this.
submerged by the slowly rising sea levels as the last ice age came to a close around 11,000 years ago. Then, 8,200 years ago, a flash flood caused by an underwater landslide triggered a catastrophic tsunami that drowned the remains of Doggerland shockingly quickly, wiping out everything in the flooded areas and leading to its abandonment for the higher ground that now forms the UK. Fishing trawlers in the area are constantly dredging up Neolithic and Mesolithic tools embedded in the seafloor. Archaeologists
So it wasn't just... so there was actually people living in these areas and that we're still finding things? Dude, that is so cool!
have found Neanderthal and mammoth bones in the area, and there are perfectly preserved human footprints in a recently exposed petrified forest along the modern coastline. Basically, the modern UK is just the highest highlands of this ancient landmass, and the entire North Sea used to be a Mesolithic woodland paradise.
Dude. And with the image she's using specifically, you can actually see where the bank would end. So what looks like just a really shallow sea, I mean, relatively shallow sea, is actually the extent of where there used to be dry land and people living on it. So the only people who would have been up here would have been the crazy ones who like to live in the mountains. And there was the mention of an ice sheet up here. So this area, Scotland, was admittedly probably still as inhabitable as it is now. But damn.
Britannia rules the waves indeed. So yeah, if you're hell-bent on researching Atlantis, try giving Doggerland a shot. I mean, it's
wrong,
right by Britain.
but it's cool.
You can, get a hotel. Way more convenient than the Eye of the Sahara. Gotta say, I ran into a lot of surprises researching this, but the biggest one for me wasn't the Minoan eruption or the imaginary mud shoal or Britlantis, or even the fact that Atlantis is canonically a completely different civilization than
I don't have any idea what it is, so it's probably the DC movie again.
ancient Greece, and people really shouldn't design it to look like underwater Greece. It's that Timaeus and Critias weren't just the names of Yu-Gi-Oh cards from the filler season about Atlantis.
I was wondering where I knew them from, and then suddenly I just realized, well, I haven't seen this, the actual show. I have seen Little Karibo's take on it in Yu-Gi-Oh! Abridged. Still a great thing. You should watch it if you haven't.
Also, that Yu-Gi-Oh! Knew more about Atlantis than I did. That one kind of stung.
I'm sorry, the Yu-Gi-Oh! Filler arc had more information than Red initially had about Atlantis when she was researching this. Not just Yu-Gi-Oh! The filler arc, admittedly one of the best filler arcs ever done because it actually was good, to the point people didn't realize it was filler. Yeah. Stung for her. I'm actually downright impressed that I now actually respect Yu-Gi-Oh! Filler, that specific part, rather than GX, even more. And yes, I am aware to someone out there who's asking, Airier, did you just conflate Yu-Gi-Oh! GX with filler? Yes. Yes, I did. I stand by everything I said as well. More importantly, though, because anything is more important than Yu-Gi-Oh! GX, I have a distinct hatred for it because the first ever season This is really cool. Doggerland, I had no idea about. I didn't know about anything in that time period because I've never really looked it up. Admittedly, I have a very schizophrenic way to look at history. It's, ooh, shiny! You know, that's not really schizophrenic. That's more ADHD in history interest. Whatever. I don't really care enough to fix it because it's fun either way. So this is the first time I've ever heard about it. And if Red referenced Blue on this, did he do any specific work on Doggerland or the mythology about Atlantis and how it was treated culturally, historically? If he did, let me know in the comments because I need to check that out next because that is so freaking cool. I know he did entire work with the various city-states in Greece, and I'm going to get to those because they look fascinating in their own right, and I just like historical aspects, but I just want more. I need more. This is so freaking cool. Learning that not only do we have artifacts from Doggerland, that we have seen the progression of the sea level rise to show what that looked like over a very long time period as the water was being released from glaciers, because the Ice Age had a lot of ice above land, but not liquid. All of that is so freaking cool. This is why I love looking at the overly sarcastic videos, because they have so much history that's been well researched and put in a very funny and innovative way that I just want more of. I'm going to be wiki walking so late tonight. Who needs sleep? I mean, technically I do, but I could ignore that because if there's enough caffeine, there's enough regretting my decision in the morning, but pretending not. Yeah. More importantly, you guys know the deal. Link below, video, hit it up. And I'll see you in the next one. Adios.